Canada. Good morning.
Morning, all.
Morning there.
Good morning, Ed.
Good morning,
Morning.
Neil.
Good morning, Neil.
Good morning, Stephen. Good to see you.
Morning, David.
Good morning there, Stephen. There is a link in the public chat if you want to share it anywhere.
Good evening, David.
Hello, hello.
What time is it back there for you, David? It's 8 a.m. here.
It's 8 p.m.
Oh, 12 hours ahead of me.
Yeah.
It's 4 p.m. in Ireland.
Well, we
11
have
a.m.
brothers from Sri Lanka and India also, and Singapore. And you can imagine how late there it is there.
I just finished my breakfast and it's nice and sunny this morning. Little chilly, 4 degrees.
Wow. It's 17 here, I think.
All right, we are live.
Can you see it?
We have shared the word that we have started the meeting, and usually some people join right there. So we are right in time. So with your kind permission, I will now mute everyone. And Brother Robert, please unmute yourself once again, please. Yeah, you're on. Okay, I'll do my very brief introduction of today's speaker and the topic. So, Kamar Jobat, that's hello in Georgian. This is Sapereau, the 107th, and welcome everyone to next lecture. We'll be discussing today the story of Irish travel and military warrants, and actually it exactly follows up our previous pre-lecture discussion, and will shed some light about warrants and charters. So really looking forward to learning more about that. And we have the honor to host second time Brother Robert Bashford from Irish Research Lodge. So in continuation of the series of public lectures, we have the honor to host Right Worshipful Brother Robert Bashford, who has been past master, past Grandmaster Standard Bearer, provincial Grand Librarian, and editor of the Irish Lodge of Research under the Grand Lodge of Ireland. He is the Masonic researcher and well known in Masonic conferences since he presented his first paper in 1984. His work on behalf of Irish Lodge of Research of number 200 and was acknowledged in 2009 with the presentation of the Lodge of Research Jewel of Merit. So we have the honor to discuss once more part of Irish, or let's say Irish part of Freemasonry, is one of the earliest, the oldest Grand Lodges of contemporary Freemasonry. So I'll remind kindly everyone that at Sapereau, we don't discuss politics, religion, and interjurisdictional issues. Everyone here is on individual basis, solely representing his own or her own opinions, and any of it shared does not represent any official statement or official standpoint of any institution, whether it be Masonic or non-Masonic, unless the person says that this is the official standpoint. These lectures are recorded and streamed on YouTube. We do allow anyone who can behave civilized manner with decency and is eager to learn more about this ancient fraternity, its national aspects, its history or philosophy. So male or female, Mason or non-Mason, you are all welcome to these lectures. I will once again remind everyone for recording purposes that virtual order of Sapereau de Vosa, which has been which we've been using as the label and symbol of these lectures, is not an institution. It is the series of lectures, and we branded it together just to easily recognize these activities in particular, as there are many other activities, educational activities out there in virtual world. This is the one that we are identified with. So again, we are here just for educational purposes, and of course, a lot of very interesting meetings, acquaintances have been made between participants, which is just welcome so much. Having said that, and having those very simple rules as umbrella for our discussions, it is my pleasure and honor to give the floor to Brother Robert, and floor is yours, brother.
Brother David, thank you very much for the warmth of your welcome, and it's a delight to be back over again to speak to yourselves and all your guests via the Grand Lodge of Georgia. This afternoon, I'm going to spend some time just going over part of our extended military history, looking at the various Irish lodges attached to regiments in the British Army. And to that end, we will kick off as we usually kick off with just starting where I'll start at the start, of course. Ireland has always been credited with the introduction of warrants, the properly constituted written authority of a Grand Lodge, issued to a group of brethren, permitting them to assemble as a lodge and conduct the business of a lodge. Now, at the same time, the Grand Secretary, John Pennell, issued the Constitution of Freemasonry in Dublin. And there we are in 1730. Now, here contained was the history, charges, regulations, and laws of that most ancient and right worshipful fraternity of Freemasons under the Irish Constitution. So all the proper building blocks were in place to complete the order, development, and expansion of Freemasonry under the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Now, the Grand Lodge of Ireland formalised the requirement for warrants and began to enforce their use throughout its area of control. Warrants were designed to be of two set types, being either stationary, issued to a lodge, or indeed travelling, attached to an army regiment or other military body. And it was from this starting point in 1731 that the Grand Lodge of Ireland spearheaded the spread of Freemasonry throughout the known world. Now, if we can just take a couple of moments, I would just like to reflect on the early records of the issue of warrants by the Grand Lodge of Ireland. In 1732, the first travelling warrant, number 11, was issued to the 1st Battalion, the Royal Scots, beginning our links with this regiment, which would continue until the year 1847. In the same year, warrant number 12 was issued to Major General Dalzell's Regiment of Foot, which later became the 33rd Foot. And a year later, in 1733, warrant number 23 was issued to Colonel Hamilton's regiment, which later came to glory as the 27th Foot Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers. The story continues in 1734 when warrant 33 was issued to the 21st Foot, better known today as the Royal Scots Fusiliers. And by this means, the leading edge of Irish Freemasonry travelled in the van of the British Army, as it ensured the safety and security of England and her many colonies throughout the world. We in Ireland still have a proud boast today, in that the sun never sets on Irish Freemasonry. We have active lodges in places as diverse as the Caribbean, Gibraltar, Nigeria, South Africa, Hong Kong, India, Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand. And indeed, in the past, we had outposts in France, the rest of Europe, the Americas, North and South, Africa, and Australasia. Now, brethren, I can see some of you are ready to say, so what? All of the home constitutions, Ireland, England, and Scotland, have travelled throughout the world. My point is merely that thanks to the introduction of written warrants, we in Ireland led the way in the introduction of a formal structure by which the art of Freemasonry could successfully be spread worldwide in the backs of our military brethren, who were able to point the local populace in the right direction to acquire regularity by applying to the Grand Lodge of Ireland for their own local warrants. And we should not forget the Irish diaspora, which for political, religious, and economic reasons spread throughout the world. These brethren too took their beloved craft with them, and on arrival in their new homelands, they would band together with their new neighbours and begin the work afresh. Now, having said all of this, the first regimental lodge I want to draw attention to this evening is the lodge that was attached to the King's Royal Regiment of Guards, one of the first regiments constituted by Charles II in 1661, as a linchpin in his new standing army. Colonel John Russell was its first commander, and the regiment was known as the King's Regiment of Foot Guards for Ireland. For the first 30 years of its existence, this regiment was permanently quartered in the city of Dublin, which at the time was considered to be the second city in the British Empire. When James II became king, he made a number of changes to the officer corps in the regiment, bringing Lieutenant Colonel William Dorrington, an English Jacobite, in as their new commander. It was the officers of this regiment that have been recorded on the 25th of March 1688 as constituting a lodge of Freemasons in the city of Dublin. And a mere 11 weeks later, on the 11th of July, 1688, in the famous Trinity College Tripos, one of the students, called John Jones, presented his humorous and ribald satire upon Trinity College and events of the day in Dublin. Now, sadly, Jones's Tripos was not well received by the college authorities, and as a result, he was deprived of his degree. On the other hand, the regiment grew from strength to strength, eventually having some 28 companies by the time of the Williamite invasion in 1690. The regiment fought bravely throughout the Glorious Revolution, participating in all the major battles such as the Boyne, Aughrim, and the retreat to Limerick. Under the eventual terms of surrender, the regiment with its surviving officers and men left from Limerick and went with their king to France. Here the regiment, under a number of colonels and chiefs, had officers such as Michael Roth. And interestingly, whilst in the court of James II, Roth would have met relations of the Earl of Ross, the first recorded Grand Master of Ireland in 1725, the fourth Viscount Barnwell of Kingsland, who became the fourth Grand Master of Ireland, and another important commander of the regiment was Colonel Robert Dillon, a minor scion of the Duke of Tyrconnell, whose military service to France resulted in his appointment to the rank of Marshal in the French army of the day. He died in 1770, and the regiment was then taken over by Joseph Philip Walsh, second Comte de Ferrand. Now, it was under Walsh that the regimental lodge was recognised on the 9th of October 1772 by the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of France, very illustrious brother, His Serene Highness Louis Philippe Joseph of Orleans, Duc de Chartres and Prince of the Royal Blood, who issued them with a French warrant under the name Le Parfait Égalité, and in this imposing document confirmed that this lodge will take seniority from the 25th of March 1688, being the date of its primitive constitution that had been deposited in the archives of this very respectable Grand Lodge. This was the first of a number of similar charters issued that confirmed the lodge attached to Walsh's regiment as being not only the oldest lodge in France, but also the first Écossais or Irish lodge. Now, curiously, as in all things French, there seems to have been great confusion between Écossais or Irish, Écossais d'Écosse or Écossais, which would both translate as Scottish. At this point, I would merely observe that in general, French Masonic historians seem to have almost entirely neglected the influence in France of the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Even Thury, the noted French Masonic writer, omits Irish Freemasonry nearly entirely, except for a passing reference to Le Poisson, Maître Irlandais, succédé au Maître Irlandais et au Perfect Maître Irlandais. One Anderson writer was Toscudi in his work Étoile Flamboyante, who uniquely in France associates Écossais with the warrants used by travelling regimental lodges, as in the case of the Walsh Regiment, and the personal warrants issued later, which he views as Écossais d'Écosse. Now we will move briefly on and have a wee look at America and see what we see there. Bear with me just 1 second. There we are. And American Masons, as we had discussed very briefly there a moment ago, really have a long history which goes back to the southwest of Ireland in the province of Munster. And if you bear with me 1 second, I'm ahead, there we are. In the province of Munster was Springett Penn, the favourite grandson of William Penn, founder of the state of Pennsylvania. Now, Springett Penn was one of the leading Freemasons in Munster before accompanying his grandfather to Pennsylvania. His involvement in the development of Freemasonry in Pennsylvania may go some way in explaining the very close links developed between Pennsylvania and the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Indeed, in the death of Right Worshipful Brother George Washington, Ireland was one of the first European constitutions to sympathise with the Brethren in Pennsylvania on the loss of this extraordinary Freemason. Now, one well-known American Masonic historian, Charles T. McClanahan, in his History of New York, tells the story of how two Irish lodges, Lodge 58, held in the 14th Regiment of Infantry, and Glittering Star Lodge number 332, attached to the 29th Regiment of Infantry, who on St. John's Day, the 27th of December, 1769, helped organize the formation of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and elected Joseph Warren to be their first Grand Master. Now, what we have here, for those not familiar with them, are very rare little pieces of paper. They are the old original smoke seals used by the regimental lodges back in the 18th century. And this particular one is from Lodge 332, associated with the 29th Regiment of Foot on the Registry of Ireland. And there are a number of these have been dug out and finally photographed and put into the public domain. It's something that most brethren won't have seen before and won't be aware of. Now, smoke seals are a very interesting 18th century development, because whenever Pennell set up the Grand Lodge laws and constitutions in 1730, one of the things you had to have, each lodge in a constitution had to have a brass seal with a hand holding a trowel. And as you look at these, as this presentation goes on, you'll see various variations of that. But the smoke seal was a brass seal, and it was held over the light of a candle in the lodge room in the meeting. And as the candle burned, the soot and the candle formed on the face of the brass smoke, the brass seal. And whenever it was sufficiently developed, the secretary used that to seal his minutes or the certificate or whatever it happened to be that needed to be sealed. And as I say, these are all 18th century seals, so they are all very rare, and sadly not many of them have survived. But that's what a smoke seal is for you, and that's your little extra for this afternoon. Now, to go back to our friend McClanahan, he goes on to note that several Irish military travelling warrants were busy in New York City in 1758. Excuse me just 1 second. He refers to Lodge number 24, attached to the 27th foot, Lodge 35, attached to the 28th foot, and suggests that both these lodges were active in the city in 1758. And indeed, there's still a suggestion in New York that civilian versions of these lodges remained in existence right up to Victorian time. In 1764, we learn an Irishman, Lieutenant John Christie of the 60th Regiment, became the first or foundation master of Civilian Lodge number 1 on the registry of the Grand Lodge of New York. And records show that a number of Irish brethren from Lodge 478, attached to 17th Light Dragoons, and Irish brethren from Lodge 399, and other military warrants both arranged themselves under the jurisdiction of the Provincial Grand Lodge of New York. And indeed, it was none other than Gould who deplored the loss of Irish records from the Seton period, but goes on to state, and here we come. The state of New York is indebted to the Grand Lodge of Ireland for the establishment upon its soil of so many lodges, its early progress in masonry, and for a knowledge of much of its early history. Now, one of our earlier warrants, number 74, was issued on the 26th of October, 1737, by the Grand Lodge of Ireland to brethren in the 2nd Battalion of the 1st Regiment of Foot. In 1759, this lodge was quartered in Albany, New York, and gave a copy of its warrant to a group of civilians in the town, who constituted Union Lodge No. 1, the first warranted lodge in the province of New York. Brother McClanahan records that military brethren from regimental lodges began to appear on American soil prior to 1737. Now, surviving records show the presence of brethren from Lodge 12 in the Irish Constitution, attached to the 33rd Foot in 1732, and Lodge 24, another Irish lodge attached to the 27th Foot in 1734. Interestingly, there was a lodge formed in New York in 1760, known as the St. John's Independent Royal Arch Lodge, and it appears that this too began life as a military lodge number 74 of the Irish Constitution, the first such Irish lodge constituted in New York under the Irish Constitution. And still, we learn more about the role of our early Irish brethren in the Americas. Lodge number 441, attached to the 38th Foot, was based in New York in 1781 and was present at the formation of the Grand Lodge of New York. One of its members, Brother John Brownrigg, was elected Senior Grand Warden of this newly formed Grand Lodge of New York. Now, it may be useful at this stage to examine in detail some of the surviving records from warrant number 11, attached to the 1st Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Foot in 1732. And this was the regiment that eventually became the Royal Scots. This early warrant was issued to Mr. James Murray, Mr. Patrick Hard, and Mr. Patrick Reid, and was in fact the first military or travelling warrant issued by the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Now, in our archives in Dublin, we have a photocopy of this original warrant issued on the 7th of November, 1732, and it reads as follows. And here we go. Nope. And we are ahead of ourselves, of course. Yeah, okay. The Right Worshipful and Right Honourable Lord Viscount Netterville, Grand Master of all the lodges of Freemasons in the Kingdom of Ireland, the Right Honourable the Lord Viscount Kingsland, Deputy Grand Master and Worshipful Brothers James Brennan and Robert Nugent, Esquire, Grand Wardens. Whereas our trusty and well-beloved brother, Mr. James Murray, Patrick Hard, and Patrick Reid, have besought us that we would be pleased to erect a lodge of Freemasons in the 1st Battalion, Royal Regiment of Foot, and such persons who by their knowledge and skill in masonry may contribute to the well-being and advancement thereof. We therefore, duly weighing the premises and having nothing more at heart than the prosperity and true advancement of masonry, and reposing special trust and confidence in our well-beloved brothers, James Murray, Patrick Hard, and Patrick Reid, of whose ability and knowledge of Freemasonry we are satisfied, and do by these presents of our certain knowledge and mere motion nominate, create, authorize, and constitute the said Mr. James Murray, Patrick Hard, and Patrick Reid to be master and wardens of a lodge of free and accepted Masons, to be held by them and their successors lawfully admitted in said lodge forever, signed by John Pennell, Lodge Secretary. And just as a little aside for you all, not only military warrants, but our ordinary domestic warrants, all have to be exposed in the lodge at labour, so that if you come in as a visitor, you will see the authority of the Grand Lodge of Ireland to the brethren present, allowing them to hold their lodge meeting under the authority of the Grand Lodge of Ireland. And that's why your lodge warrants are so important in relation to the Irish Constitution. Now, travelling military lodges are a very special group of people. And the following letter from the Secretary of Lodge 11, which is the Royal Scots, and at this stage James Turk was the Secretary, highlights a number of the problems that can arise whilst managing a travelling lodge far from home. On the 4th of June 1808, the Secretary had written off to a Grand Lodge in Dublin, "Dear Sir and Brother, I take the liberty of addressing you again on the subject of having our members registered on the books of the Grand Lodge. At the same time, I hope you will pardon me for not remitting the money sooner, but not meeting with a safe opportunity until the present one was the only cause of delay. We have now entrusted our money to the bearer, Captain William Turnbull, commander of the ship Stark, bound for Dublin, who is an ancient master mason, and he will pay on our behalf into your hand the sum of £10 sterling for the above-mentioned purposes. I also send you a correct list of the members of Lodge number 11 and the names of several brethren deceased since my first letter to you. Any small balance that may be left, please have the goodness to appropriate to any purposes you may think suitable. In my last, I wrote we were under orders for some other part of the West Indies, but that order has since been countermanded. I have nothing particular to communicate, only beg you'll be pleased to acknowledge the receipt of this and wishing the Brotherhood every possible success. And I have the honour to subscribe myself, dear Sir and Brother, for and in the name of our Lodge, yours very faithfully. Also listed are 11 shown as dead." Now, clearly most stationary lodges rarely advise details of their dead to Grand Lodge, but this was the standard form used in military, where death and injury were a major part of the stock and trade of a military lodge. And another surviving letter highlights another major stumbling block encountered by some of our military brethren. "I hope you will credit me when I say that we in the Army labour under many disadvantages that men in civil life do not. And a great one is that a commanding officer may not consent to the meeting of a lodge in the regiment under his orders. Indeed, some think they may not be justified in allowing it, and we are aware that, however, that it could be done outside the barracks without consulting him. But it answers better generally not to do anything against his will. Heretofore we have had in the depot of a commanding officer who countermanded and promoted the art, but it is now a little difficult, although we are getting on again quietly, as our present chief sees that those under his command who belong to the fraternity conduct themselves uprightly and as becoming free and accepted masons. I think he will not throw any great objections in our way. There are perhaps other trifling reasons which I don't think worthwhile to declare, as I would hope that you will understand from the above that the delay was not occasioned through any fault of our own. If you have any order or authority for the location of military lodges, or anything bearing on the subject, you would confer a great obligation by favouring me with a copy, and any charge thereon will be willingly paid. By payment of the £1, it's to be understood that the brethren at present belonging to the depot, and who did not previously belong to number 11, in all 4 number, will be required to pay the transfer fee. I also beg you will be good enough to inform me what may be the fewest number that can form a Royal Arts chapter. I've always understood it to be 9, but some say a lesser number can do it, and if so, would answer military chapters better generally, as it often happens that they are stationed at places where they're not even a lodge, and sometimes so detached that they cannot, without great inconvenience, assemble 9. Upon receipt of your answer to the foregoing queries, and which it is sincerely hoped may be without unnecessary delay, a list of office bearers will be sent to you. I am yours fraternally, Alexander Fraser, Secretary. quite a bit of difficulty being in a military lodge in the 18th century. Now we're going to look at Irish Warrant number 12, which was also issued by the Grand Lodge of Ireland in November 1732 to a number of brethren and Major General Desilles Regiment of Foot.
Brother Robert, slides are, sorry for interrupting you. Slides are not changed. We are on the early slides.
Oh, sorry, yes, go ahead.
So, yeah, okay, sorry.
There we are, we'll go there. All right. Where are we? Yes, Irish Warrant number 12 was also issued by the Grand Lodge of Ireland in November 1732, a number of brethren and Major General Desilles Regiment of Foot, which later became the 33rd Foot. 1853, Queen Victoria gave permission for this regiment to be renamed after its most distinguished former officer as the 33rd Duke of Wellington's Regiment, the only British regiment named for a person not of the royal blood. There are no surviving records of this lodge, and we only know of its existence from Smith's invaluable 1735 list of lodges, where it appears as number 13, Major General Desilles Regiment of Foot, which met every third Friday in Dublin. And this, in accordance with the complicated sliding scale of Dublin Lodge numbers, takes us to the official Grand Lodge number of 12, which is how we know it today. Now, we then will move on. If you bear with me 1 second, we'll just flick on up. We will move on to, where are we? There we are. We'll move on to the 27th Foot, the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers. In 1753, this lodge was present in Edinburgh at the laying of the foundation stone of the Edinburgh Exchange, and indeed feature in the engraving that was produced of that particular ceremony. And thus we have to depend upon outside evidence for knowledge that it ever worked and lived. Peter Ross, historian of the Grand Lodge of New York, states that George Harrison was appointed Provincial Grand Master of New York in the year 1753. And that prior to Harrison's time, there were at least 3 regiments in that country, the state of New York, holding warrants. The 55th Foot, which was the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers, met under warrant number 86. The Irish 33rd Foot, formerly Major General Dalzell's Regiment, which met under warrant 12, and the 27th Foot, the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, who met under warrant number 24. Now, when it comes to learning the history of the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, we read like our very first military unit recorded in this paper. The Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers and the 6th Enniskillen Dragoons were among the oldest regiments in the British Army, having been raised by the people of Enniskillen in the year 1689. And both regiments bore the distinctive badge of the 3-turreted castle, or of Enniskillen, flying the St. George's flag. Now, the town of Enniskillen in County Fermanagh, Northern Ireland, has the unique distinction of being the only town in the British Isles able to raise, name, and maintain 2 regiments in the British Army. And like all great regiments, the Enniskillen Fusiliers have a great record for hard fighting, which can be best described in their battle cry. Usually they sing this, brother, but I'm not a singer, so I'll just read it to you. Here, here, the skins are here. What the hell do we care? Here, the skins are here. What the hell do we care? It's a grand old team to play for. It's a grand old team to win. When you read our history, it's enough to make your heart go sad. We don't care whether we win or lose or draw. Damn the hell we care. For we only know that there's going to be a fight and the Royal Enniskillens will be there. And there indeed is the flags of the Fusiliers, the Royal Enniskillens. Now, the skins were formed outside Enniskillen Castle on the 20th of June, 1689, in response to the threat to their religion and freedom arising from the forces of King James II. They fought on the side of William of Orange at the Battle of the Boyne, and went on to fight with an Anglo-Dutch army trying to repel the French invasion of the Netherlands. They played a leading part in the capture of the great fortress of Namur in 1695. Then in 1746, they were on the losing side at the Battle of Falkirk, when Bonnie Prince Charlie and his Highlanders defeated government forces on that day. In 1751, when all the infantry regiments were renumbered, the Enniskillens retained their original regimental number of 27. They fought in North America in the 1750s against the French during the 7 Years' War and stayed on for long periods in the eastern states. They played an active part in the American War of Independence and then went on to play a leading part in the capture of St. Lucia from the French in 1778. Now, in the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1778, the regiment were again called to fight with the French. In 1796, they led the attack on the French fortress Morne-Fortin in St. Lucia, and despite great losses, they carried the day. Their commander was so proud that he allowed them to fly the regimental standard over the fortress for an hour before the Union Jack was raised. This famous victory is still marked by the regiment right up to the present day, when St. Lucia's Day, the 24th of May, is still commemorated by the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers Regimental Association. Now, brethren, in a brief effort to be even-handed, I think one should draw attention to the fact that in the year 1788, one of the America's most adventurous sailors, Captain John Paul Jones, whilst in command of the USS Ranger, a ship of the United States Continental Navy, sailed over into my neck of the woods in North Antrim, and there's Carrickfergus Castle in the background, where they attacked a British warship, HMS Drake, a 20-gun British frigate, which was anchored off the harbour at Carrickfergus Castle. The battle began on the 24th of April, 1788, and in fact, this became the very first defeat of a Royal Navy ship in British home waters by any force anywhere in the world. So well done to our friend John Paul Jones. Brethren, we will now move back into the smoke seals for you, and we have a selection of smoke seals here. Our first one, Lodge 388, was issued to brethren in the 1st Squadron of Lord Drogheta's Light Dragoons on the 2nd of December 1762. The regiment was raised in Ireland in 1759 by the Marquis of Drogheda, who was Grand Master of Ireland in 1758, the year before, and numbered 19th Light Dragoons, which was renumbered to 18 in 1763. In 1807, the name of the regiment became Hussars, and eventually were disbanded in 1821. Interestingly, their battle honours later borne by the 18th Hussars, raised in 1858, and again they tended to recruit down around the Dundalk and Drogheda areas of Ireland at that time. And again, brethren, I would stress to you just how hard it is to find these little pieces of paper with the smoke seals on them. So few of them have survived, and it's great to have this opportunity just to show you the variety of designs that you find in the smoke seals of that period. We move on then to warrant number 400, which we find back in 1923, an old box was discovered over in Abbey Lodge, Boyle, and the equipment of the old military lodge number 400, formerly of the 13th Light Dragoons, was exhibited. Now, I would say up until 1923, we had virtually no surviving material from Lodge 400. So the majority of what we have currently in our archives comes from this chest and Boyle. Now, it was opened and the equipment found to be in a good state of preservation. And amongst other things, the chest contained the original Lodge warrant, number 400, issued in 1763 to form a lodge of Freemasons in the city of Cork, and then transferred in 1791 by the Provincial Grand Lodge of Munster to the above regiment. Also surviving, but not in great condition, were 3 old Masonic flags for the Croft, the Royal Arch, and the Knight Templars, and 6 of the brass seals for the various degrees worked under the Croft warrant. As you can see, they operated both Croft, Royal Arch, and Knight Templars under the blue or Croft warrant, because it wasn't until the 1836 that the Grand Lodge of Ireland, or the Supreme Grand Chapter of Ireland, was formed, and we then had an independent Supreme Body for Royal Arch Chapter, and followed shortly after a Supreme Body for the High Knight Templars. So in the period that we're looking at, all of the degree work was done under the blue or Croft warrant. And that takes us now along to warrant number 577, which was issued on the 7th of September 1780 to the 3rd Irish Horse. Here again, this is one of the old regiments dating back to 1691, when at that time in its history it was known as the Carbonaries, though it was also known as the First Carbonaries and the King's Carbonaries. And in 1746, the regiment moved on to the Irish establishment as the 3rd Regiment of Horse. And as you can see, they then went on and they commemorated their origins on their seal. The seals dated 1780, but the Carbonaries title had long gone by that stage in their development. Now, the annals of the Peninsular War furnish many fascinating Masonic illustrations, and those of the 6th Dragoon Guards with their Irish Masonic Lodge 577 are particularly interesting. And indeed, we'll just stick with the 577 at the moment. The regiment, after a severe engagement, lost its baggage, amongst which was a chest containing the lodge furniture, warrant, and jewels. The commander of the capturing party, when he saw the Masonic emblems in the chest, immediately sent for one of the prisoners and demanded to know the meaning of these marks, which the soldier, as far as was prudent, explained. The French officer, in finding the chest belonged to a Freemason's lodge, directed it to be returned to the English regiment with a flag of truce and a guard of honour, forwarding at the same time a letter stating that although not a Freemason himself, he respected the society and that his brother officers would never forgive him if he did not treat the misfortunes of their Masonic brethren with consideration. Now, brethren, there is so much information and so many artifacts and surviving seals and material that I could probably talk on here for a long time. Here we have an example of one of the old lodge warrants, with personal certificate issued by a traveling warrant to a brother. This is a fascinating one from one of the local militia lodges, Lodge 10. And as you can see, their secretary is obviously a man of artistic bent, because he drew out the entire certificate himself before wording it in the proper way, getting it signed by the various dignitaries and issuing it to the brother concerned. And then, just to give you another indication of some of the other old seals that we still have. Now, brethren, in conclusion, I just want to finish off with the Emigrant's Prayer, which is a traveller's prayer from the 19th century. Our Father's God, from out whose hand the centuries fall like grains of sand, we meet today united free and loyal to our land and thee, to thank thee for the era done and trust thee for the opening one. Be with us while the new world greets, the old world thronging all its streets, unveiling all the triumphs won by art of toil beneath the sun, and unto common good ordain this rivalship of hand and brain. O make thou us through centuries long in peace secure, on justice strong, around our gift of freedom draw the safeguards of thy righteous law, and cast in some diviner mold, let the new cycle shame the old. Brethren, I would thank you all for this opportunity to draw your attention to another small dark corner of Irish Masonic history, And I hope you all found something of enjoyment and pleasure in the content of the presentation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Brother Robert. The floor is open for questions. If anyone wants to use the opportunity to ask the question, please. I see several new participants, and please find the raise hand button, and I'll then follow the order. So let's start with Brother Josen.
Good evening. Thanks for the talk. You've spoken a lot about traveling lodges in USA, the Irish lodges. I understand that there were traveling lodges, Irish traveling lodges in India, much way back before traveling lodges, regiments went to USA. In fact, you have lodges dating Irish Constitution from number 63 onwards in India, traveling lodges. Also, there was lodges from, I think, from 1754. There were a lot of lodges, traveling lodges. Can you explain a bit about the Indian aspect of that? Because those Irish regiments were there in India much before they went to USA. Could you throw some light on that?
I can certainly, Joseph. The Irish warrants are issued to the lodges. Military lodges, by their very nature, served time in India, they served time in Australia, they served time in the Americas, they served time in Canada. The warrant went with the regiment depending where it was sent. And there is, you're quite right in what you say, I mean, one of our probably most famous and public Masonic statues is down in a place called Comber in County Down. And it recalls Sir Rollo Gillespie, who actually was killed during the troubles in India in the early part of the 19th century. And his famous last words before he died was one more charge for the honour of Down. And Down was his home county, and unfortunately he was killed in the attack that he was involved in. But certainly there's a great tradition of military warrants serving in India. And indeed, the other famous part of that, and it's still current today, is the early adventures they had in what is now Pakistan, and indeed on up into the Himalayas, up into Afghanistan, and the service that they had there over the years. It's the nature of a military regiment, which is basically a tool used by government to encourage people to follow their particular way of life. And the military warrants were exemplary in doing that, and doing that right across the globe. We have examples, for example, of an Irish lodge in Peru at one time. We have other ones down in South America, and it's a fascinating, it's a massive story because you have to basically take one regiment, and if you look at the records of one individual regiment, you'll find they maybe spend 2 or 3 years in somewhere like Ireland, which is why we have so many Scottish warrants, or so many Scottish regiments with Irish warrants, and then they're moved out and they're sent to whichever part of the world they're required in. And indeed, quite a few of them served, for example, in Waterloo and did well there. Others served in the Peninsula Wars in Spain. And as I say, it's an area with a large concentration of work by the Irish military masons.
Thank you. I've just also link of the history of Irish lodges in India for anyone who would be interested, because it's quite interesting. It goes back a long, long time. A lot of lodges, some lodges even lost their warrants in the wars. The whole regiment was decimated and they lost the jewels and the warrants also. So it's interesting reading for those who would like to do it. I've just posted it in the chat.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jocelyn. I would look forward to reading that. And indeed, there's a wealth of material, as you quite rightly say, out there.
Because still in India, we have Irish lodges. India, we have 4 constitutions. We have the English constitution, which is practiced, the Scottish, the Irish, and the Indian. So
correct. That's
have a
correct.
mix of everything, and they're still alive here.
Oh, that's very true. And
Okay.
thank you for your
Yeah, please.
question.
Pleasure.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And the question comes from the chat. Brother David Waddington is asking, where did the Right Honorable Lord Viscount Netherwell, Grand Master of Ireland, come from, and what is his backstory?
The family came over to Ireland in the 1600s and eventually settled down in the southeast of Ireland and got lands there and grew and developed there. They, as all of the major aristocracy at that time, also then took houses in Dublin and were based there. The family seemed to have been very early into Freemasonry, as indeed a number of the leading families were at that time. And he would have been back and forth to London as well, following the London social set, and became involved with Freemasonry in Ireland and then Freemasonry in England, and came very quickly to the fore as our fourth Grand Master.
Okay. Okay, answer's taken. There is a question from Brother Zvi in YouTube. Where are the first traveling lodges under the Grand Lodge?
The very
Which
first
one?
travelling lodge was number 11, the Royal Scots. And that was the first one, and that was the warrant that we looked at, was the warrant of the Royal Scots, which I read you the text of. And for that reason, because they were the first, I thought it was worthwhile just to let you see the wording which was used in 1732 when that warrant was issued. And of course, I should say at this point, it's the 11th lodge. It is the 11th warrant in the world, was that particular warrant in 1732. No one else was issuing warrants for 20 years after that. The Grand Lodge of the Ancients didn't start issuing warrants in the 1750s. The moderns followed on about 10 years after that, and then the whole thing exploded and every constitution around the globe started using warrants. But for the first 20 years, the only official warrant issued anywhere in the world were Irish. And the Scots Guards have the honour of being the first military travelling warrant that was issued.
Okay, thank you for the answer. My question would be, how were the traveling lodges practicing only first 3 degrees, or did they practice any other rituals beyond that?
In the very early days, they would have been practicing the first 3 degrees and what we call the master's part, which was effectively the 4th or past master's degree. But come the mid-1740s, as our degree structure developed, we then found the Royal Arch. And the Royal Arch degrees came out of the master's part. And the military lodges very quickly took those on board. And then, of course, as you would expect in a military lodge, they also very quickly took up the early grand encampment workings, which would be what we would call preceptory workings today. They would be a lot more comfortable with swords than you and I would be. And they would have worked the High Knight Templar degrees, they would have worked the Royal Arch degrees, and they would have worked the craft degrees. But as I said earlier in the presentation, you need to bear in mind that until 1836 in Ireland, there was no other official body other than the Grand Lodge of Ireland. And all the degree work which I've referred to there would have been carried out under the craft or blue warrant until 1836, and then become more complicated with more grand bodies. But up until that period, that was how it worked, and worked very successfully.
Okay, thank you. Brother Stefan?
Thank you, David. Brethren, Brother Bashford, as I mentioned the last time when we spoke briefly, I'm a member of St. John's number 209A under the Grand Lodge of Canada. And it started out as Lodge 209 Irish Registry, and came out of the Royal Ulster Rifles that were carrying the warrant number 83,
That's correct.
which was
That's
the
correct,
same
yeah.
as their regiment number.
Mhm.
A couple of things I wanted to mention, and then I had a question for you. I read a piece a while ago by a very worshipful brother Parkinson. He was speaking about the
R.E. Parkinson?
yes, that's right.
Yes, very,
Yeah,
very prominent Masonic researcher in Ireland, and he's dead.
yeah. And one of the things that he said was that that I found interesting was that the members of the regiment found that their appreciation for their lodge warrant was almost as much as, well, it was actually the most important thing to them besides their colors, which I thought was quite interesting. Anyway, I was going to say then that the Lodge 209 has an unusual form of ritual. I'm not going to go into saying what the ritual is or anything. I'm just speaking of it in general terms. And under the Grand Lodge of Canada, when it started, they were permitted to continue to use their same ritual. And then at one point, the Grand Lodge of Canada tried to force them to change to do the same work as everybody else. And they rebelled by picking up their original warrant, which they still had a copy of, and reestablished themselves as Lodge 209 Irish Register for about 10 years. Anyway, I've been trying to track down where this ritual comes from because a number of the members were in Ireland in their 100th anniversary, I think it was, and they couldn't, like everywhere they went, the ritual that they were seeing was not what they do, and so they were quite confused about that. And I wondered if you had any idea about where that might have come from.
Yes, well, firstly, before we go off R.E. Parkinson, Parkinson was the man who actually researched and published Volume 2 of the History of the Grand Lodge of Ireland, and a very, very prominent man in his day, there's no doubt about it. Now, going on to your ritual, I suspect that what has happened, your original military lodge was traveling quite widely. And it would have been, if you go to somewhere like, for example, Gibraltar, had they been in Gibraltar, the ruling party in Gibraltar was United Grand Lodge of England. And there was a certain amount of, how can I put this, cross-fertilization between English, Scottish, and Irish ritual. Our friend in India would have had the same problem, where depending which one was the senior lodge, would have been influential on the workings of the other two constitutions. And this was a very common problem. Now, in Ireland, as you may or may not know, we have a body called the Grand Lodge of Instruction. And the Grand Lodge of Instruction actually are the gatekeepers of our Irish ritual. And they invite lodges throughout the island of Ireland to come along and to present a degree or to present an opening or a closing. And then they will comment on that, how that relates back to the standard ritual which we're all expected to carry out. Now that works well in Ireland, where we are all, we're only at the most probably a couple of 100 miles away from other, it's within a day's journey. But if you have a regiment sitting in Canada or a regiment in Australia or a regiment in Singapore, they are very much on their own. And if you're in a situation where another constitution has the sway, it can be awkward enough. I mean, interesting enough, recently I had a case we came on where the Lodge of Erin was in Shanghai, and the actual constitution ceremony for the Lodge of Erin back in 1920 was carried out by the District Grand Master of United Grand Lodge of England. Now, thankfully, our Irish brethren in the Lodge of Erin survived, and eventually they moved back to Singapore after the Second World War because of communism and what have you, and they had moved out at that stage. But the interesting thing is it's the only example I can find of a district master of the United Grand Lodge of England constituting an Irish lodge. But on the other side of the coin, we have a number of lodges. Well, one or two lodges. We have a lodge, Glittering Star, which most of you are aware of. They held the only meeting that has ever been held in the White Tower of the Tower of London. And they had three Grand Masters and a past Grand Master present in 1938 on that particular occasion. And of course, as the work was been done under the Irish Constitution, the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Ireland was the man in the chair. And unusually, the Grand Master of England, or sorry, the Deputy Grand Master of England had to sit on the sidelines whilst work was being carried out in the Tower of London under an Irish ritual. So there are strange anomalies out there, and what you're saying doesn't surprise me. There are quite a number, and even, to be fair, even today, there are a number of lodges at a distance that may well not be quite 100% the Irish ritual that you would get in Ireland. But that's not a criticism of them. At the end of the day, they're working in difficult circumstances on their own, I would have to say. And we're prepared to cut them a little bit of slack. And then whenever they come back home to Ireland, we'll tell them what they're doing wrong. And thank you.
That was very good. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question from Brother Joseph, but I guess I answered that the difference of 4,000 years, which has been calculated from Anno Lucis. So why is it 1732 and in Masonry it's 5,732, 5732. So anyway, I guess that was answered. Brother Hasu is asking, can you please enlighten us on the traveling lodges involved in initiating locals, especially in America, such as the start of the process for Prince Hall lodges? I was led to believe from a past lecture that Prince Hall was initiated by an Irish regiment with an English warrant.
That's quite possible. The same applies to what I said earlier about Scottish regiments being based in Dublin. There are quite a number of Irish regiments were based in London and were based in Glasgow and based in Edinburgh. It was unusual. It would be very unusual to get an Irish regiment and an Irish county. They tended to keep the Irish in England or Scotland. They tended to keep the Scottish in Ireland or England, and they put the English everywhere. That wouldn't be at all surprising for an Irish regiment working under an English warrant. That wouldn't be out of the way at all. The Prince Hall story certainly has, from what my understanding of it is, it has a background with the military whenever he was brought in and received his degrees there. I'm trying to think. Oscar Allen did a fantastic book 2 or 3 years ago which covered that entire story. And he was over and met with Rebecca, our Grand Lodge Archivist in Dublin, and spent some time going through our archives of the military lodges at that time in New York. And he developed the story very well and did very well out of it. I mean, he covered the thing extremely well. To be honest, I'm not 100% up to speed with the ins and outs of the Grand Lodges in the States at the minute, but I'm looking too far back. My problem. It's an area which will repay research, no doubt about it, and they certainly have grown. The Prince Hall Masonry has grown exponentially over probably the last 40 years, which is good to see, because at the end of the day, if we're going to succeed as an organization, we have to include everybody. That's the bottom line. We have to be welcoming. We have to extend the right hand of fellowship to everybody, and in that way we can encourage people in, encourage them along, and help them over their difficulties to get them to the same level that we're at. And that's really what we're trying to do, which is what you're trying to do, David, with what you're doing here.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer as well. Brother John Cameron, what is yours?
Thank you, David. Brother Bashford, in
a slide early in your slide deck. You had shown a slide depicting the siege of Louisbourg. And I'm assuming that would be the Louisbourg, Nova Scotia.
That's correct.
Okay, so the forces, the British forces marshaled in Halifax prior to the attack on Louisbourg. So I would assume then that the Irish regiments partook in the siege of Louisbourg. So they would be stationed in Halifax. I'm wondering, in Halifax, you'd also have the Scottish regiments and British regiments. Would the practice be that the Irish traveling warrants that the brothers had with them, would the Irishmen practice their ritual while they were in Halifax, overwintered in Halifax, or would the three, would it be general practice to have the three separate?
It would be the
nationalities or forces.
Yes, it would be the general rule at that period in time that each of the constituted lodges would met. They would have met with Irish ritual in an Irish lodge, Scottish ritual in a Scottish lodge, and English ritual in an English lodge, and that would have tended to be how it was. Now, David touched on a question earlier, which I didn't really respond to, but the interesting thing at that period, of course, whenever you think about it, quite a number of the military at that time would have been stuck into houses with people. They would have been requisitioned and stuck into barns and stuck into houses, and they would have been living cheek by jowl with local people. And this is how we get that initial spurt of enthusiasm to see what these guys are doing in their lodge room. And depending on the soldiers and the master of the day, most of them would have been quite open to bringing in new people and giving them degrees and charging them a few pounds, which would go into the drinks fund or whatever. So that was one of the initial ways, and not only Ireland, I would say Scotland and English lodges would do the same. They would encourage the locals to become involved. If you're doing it today, they would talk about hearts and minds. They were doing it 250 years ago, and that's basically what it was. It was hearts and minds. You were getting people, because whenever people are all put together and working together, sometimes it's very difficult to get, you're keeping them on board with you. They're not really falling out, and they're not all the hassle and stuff that you can get sometimes today. If people are all in together and they're all seeing it, I mean, if you're sitting in a lodge room with some of the locals and some of the military, and you can see that they're not bad guys, it's very hard to then come out and shoot them afterwards. So from that point of view, the hearts and minds thing has worked through Freemasonry over a long period of our history. And once you get the local people involved, it then becomes a very small step. A couple of the lodges, in fact, actually got one of the guys in the lodge to write out a copy of their warrant. And whenever the regiment was moved somewhere else, they left a copy of their warrant that the locals continued to meet under. Now, it wasn't an official document, but having said that, it was sufficient. And the guys had seen their Freemasonry with the military, so they knew what they were doing. And they worked that way until such times as matters resolved themselves, and they either applied for an Irish or Scottish warrant, or they applied to their own new provincial bodies as they were formed. But certainly that aspect of it shouldn't be overlooked. And that's one of the ways that, in particular, Irish Freemasonry became such a powerhouse and spreading Freemasonry around the globe, because whenever they went there, that's what they did. They brought in the locals and involved the locals, and it worked very well for them. It worked very well for the locals as well, of course.
May I ask a follow-up question respecting the archives of the Grand Lodge of Ireland? Are they digitized and available?
I would love to say yes to that, John, but unfortunately, we are probably still in the 19th century from a digital point of view. Whenever you want to do a paper, you have got to pack yourself off, go down to Buzzell's in Dublin, negotiate a good room rate for the week, and spend the week with Rebecca. And Rebecca's very good, very helpful. But having said that, they're not funding her enough to get the thing digitized, sadly. We will get there eventually. And that's why, particularly there this evening, that's why I wanted to show the smoke seals, for example. We have a good collection of smoke seals gathered up over probably about 12 years now, and we're only really now starting to get them out there and let people see the variety of stuff that's there.
Thank you, my brother. I appreciate it.
John, good to hear from you, and thanks for your question.
Thank you. There is a question from Brother Andrew Logan. How many of these military and traveling lodges still exist today?
The answer to that's very simple. There is one travelling warrant left in Ireland, and that is Glittering Star. And that basically meets in the Midlands of England. They're moving now down, I think, to the south of England this year. But they are the main surviving true military lodge that we have, and they have a number of serving military people involved.
On the territory of England, you said?
England, yes. That foreign country to us.
Okay. I will just check if there is any question. Would the Brother Hasu is asking, would the members of the Irish Lodge be mostly speculative, or were they operatives who joined due to lack of work in the working crafts?
There may well have been a few operatives, but having said that, the majority of them would have been speculative. We found in England, we found from our records in Ireland, and we know from the records in Scotland, that a career in the army was a very sought after post. You were there, you were getting fed regularly, you were getting money, and you were seeing the world. And it appealed to a lot of young men, as it indeed it still does to this day. It's an opportunity to travel, it's an opportunity to get trained, and you had a chance to go out and see around you. And most of them would come from a military background. They would have become aware of Freemasonry, and they would then have looked at it initially as a social thing, and then, as you've seen from some of the correspondence, that developed beyond that for quite a few of them as well. They began to buy into the whole Masonic message.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. I will share now screen. Just 1 second. I hope it streams to you. Do you see the page now?
Yes,
Okay, so this is the church. The initial one was built in 4th century by wood, and it is not remain. It doesn't remain there, but we have some pieces of foundation. But this is the place where, in later 6th century, another church was built, and again in 11th century, exactly this building has been built. This is Georgia, Tzcheta. This is old capital, and even today it's like the most sacred place, the ancient place for Georgian Orthodox to go, and it's just it's like an acting church right now. So it has right to the size where I'm pointing this symbol, the hand with the square, which has not really been explained. 11th century is the time when there is a Crusaders war in Jerusalem. Georgia has become very influential in the region, and this building has been built. And this is the unique to this church. It is not a common thing to see around. We have hundreds of churches, bigs and smalls, and they never use this symbol. So I was wondering if I see in your presentation that you would see hand with trowel, right?
yes,
In many cases. So was there this kind of symbol anywhere seen in Freemasonry, in operative one, in speculative one, hand with the square?
I haven't seen that on anything Masonic that I'm aware of, but for my money, I would suspect that that is actually the Master Mason in the practical sense. The Master Mason who controlled the building of that church may well have put that up as his memorial. We have one or two early memorials from the 11th century here in Ireland, commemorating the master mason who built Bangor Abbey is one, Carrickfergus Church of Ireland is another one, both 11th century. And they have in there a panel commemorating the architect or master mason. He would have been the master of the entire construction in those days. And it may well be that is his symbol. One interesting thing there, I don't know, are there any other mason's marks on the stonework, or is that the one and only design?
Well, there are some decorations of different, let's say.
You know what I mean? There's nowhere where the master mason has chiseled his symbol. This is my stone that I did last Tuesday. You have to pay me for this stone because that's the one I made. And I would look from where it looks to be fairly high up in the church. I would suspect that what that is that the architect, or what you would have called in those days the master mason, would have put that up as his mark. This is my church. Stand back and admire it. Stand back and weep. You know, this is what I have done. This is my gift to God. And that may well be what the intention is there.
Okay, on that facade, it has like several 4 or 5 kind of symbols, and one of these is the square, hand with the square. We know that it comes from the architect, actually, the main architect, but we don't know why he used it, because no one else. We have churches from 6th century just in nearby that place. We have 7th, 8th, 10th, and so on and on and on. But we never have seen the square and hand being used as a kind of mark or something. So I just wonder
where you are in Georgia. You would be in a part of the world where there would have been great interchange between the Christians and the Muslims. You would have been in a period in the history where a lot of the mathematical work which had been done in North Africa and what have you, all the stuff to do with angles and squares, which is basically the secret of why there's so much Gothic church building in France. It is the bringing home by the Crusaders of the mathematical knowledge, the geometrical knowledge, to allow them to do the flying buttresses and stuff, which had been designed initially by the Phoenicians and by the Egyptians and by whoever, and it was brought home and brought in and fed in that way. And the importance of the square set and established in any degree as a key thing for the architect to do. And it may well be that was him declaring what he had done and how he had done it with the square, because knowledge of the square for many, many centuries was really restricted to a small number of people, because that was the key to actually the glories of building, particularly, as I say, the Gothic cathedrals.
But this one is not Gothic, actually.
No, I understand that, but all I'm saying is that in the same way as the designs went back to the Crusaders to France, it may well have traveled up to Georgia, up through Turkey, and it may well have come from that type of source. But obviously he understood the use of the square and the fact that he built such a magnificent building.
Yes, that's true. That's true. We've been quite close always with many civilizations around us, but Christian-wise and the Christian architecture that we used to build was from Byzantine, Greek, like Anatolian side of it.
But it does have strong. It would have a strong link to mosques, for example, under the construction of mosques. It's using that type of knowledge and putting it to use in a Christian church, and that may well have been one of the earlier ones to do that. Whenever you travel about, you see a lot of very small old churches, but really they are not geometrically designed, would I say. They are, I hesitate to say box-like, but you know what I mean. They are functional and they do what they have to do. But what you have there is a man putting his heart out to build something to the glory of God, and that's what he has succeeded in doing. And he has marked it with his stamp of the hand and the square, showing how he did it. It's the old story, you know. You hide these things in the open and nobody ever sees them.
Okay, I just wanted to see your opinion on that. Just trying to understand better my heritage here as well. Okay, any more questions? I'll just scroll down again. No, everything's here. All right. So one more question I think that I would like to ask regarding the Irish Freemasonry is that we had excellent lecture by Brother Jacques regarding ancient and accepted Scottish rite. So what's your point of view? We heard several opinions. To what extent Irish Freemasonry or rituals have been absorbed into ancient and accepted Scottish rite? I know that some degrees have been just, I guess, copy pasted, or at least it has been practiced already in Scotland when ancient and accepted Scottish rite kind of has been formed. But was it absorbed as such, as fully? Some of the rituals from Ireland?
Not to the same extent. We in Ireland had a similar degree structure in the 19th century, which was known as the pillared priests. And it was a higher degree structure, which was very, very, very popular in the northeast of Ireland and had a number of adherents. Very religious, very Christian based. And it would have been one of the areas of consideration by Grand Lodge at that time. They had the ancient accepted Scottish rite. They also had at that time with Fowler and the Duke of Leinster an interest in the Order of Miserum, the 96-degree structure of the Order of Miserum. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the one that came through and got approval from the Grand Lodge of Ireland ultimately was the ancient accepted. But the ancient accepted basically was brought in as a formed structure from the States at that time. And there's been a wee bit of fiddling around the edges, I believe. But really, it's an important degree. It's not a homegrown Irish degree. And the sad thing is that in the pillared priests, if you now want to become a pillared priest, which was an Irish form degree, you have to go to the northeast of England, up to Sunderland and Yorkshire, particularly up around Newcastle, where you can join the High Knight Templar priests, which is the old Irish pillared priest degree. But sadly, under the Charter of Rights in Ireland, you can no longer work pillared priests, an Irish degree in Ireland.
Okay, and I just will follow up. It may be a little bit off topic, but as a historian, as Irish historian of Freemasonry, we've heard so many legends, myths, or history about Knights Templars' connection with the Freemasonry. What would be your stand or point of view regarding these two institutions, the historical one and the present one? Is there any linkage? Is there any kind of transfer of arts which could have happened from Knights Templars?
You may not like my answer, but unfortunately, I don't believe there are any links historically between the Knights Templar and Freemasonry. I just don't buy that at all. Anything that you read about the Knights Templar, they would have been quite a proud group of men, and I can't see them hiding away in the midst of stone builders and stonemasons. I don't buy that. They may have appeared at Bannockburn and helped the Bruce to win the battle. That's something I don't know, but I don't see that link. We had a number of Knight Templar consistories in Ireland in the 11th, 12th, 13th century, and they all died out whenever the Knight Templars died out. And we then got to the stage where our old friends in the 18th century, whenever the French began looking at craft masonry wasn't sufficient for them, and they then began looking at higher degrees, and they began this whole thing of titles with knights and what have you. Ramsay came across there. Ramsay was quite a fan of Dean Swift in Dublin, and came across quite a bit to Dublin, and he may well have seen some of the early Grand Encampment workings in Dublin in the early part of the 18th century. And that may have been where his famous oration came from, which again, I don't think was ever presented, but I mean, it's a matter of record that it had been written. And slowly but surely, the whole Knight Templar thing grew and developed. Now, I mentioned earlier the discovery in Abbey Lodge Boyle. One of the other things they found in Abbey Lodge Boyle was 20 wooden swords and 20 small, well-leafed volumes of St. John's Gospel, that whenever you have it in your hand, it will automatically fall open. Let there be light, and there was light, the verse 1, chapter 1, which was part of the early Grand Encampment working at that period. So obviously, that was something that was developed at that time in Ireland, but I don't see any historical links beyond that any further back. It was part of the development at that time whenever they were looking at many different degrees. Sometime in the future, we'll maybe get a slot and I'll do a presentation on the Red Cross degrees in Ireland, which again are from the same early period. And they lead on then and to what, of course, is today the Council Knight Masons. But they were a long established series of old degrees that was worked in Ireland at the same period as the early Grand Encampment was working. So there are a number of developments over the years. As things go on, it's like everything else. Once you've had your 3 degrees, you want something else. So you then, as a completion of the story of the Royal Arch, then you want something else. So you then look, where do we go from here? And you go towards the Knight Templars. All looks good. You put on your white dress, and away you go. And that's part of the development. And then eventually the Red Cross degrees. Then in the mid-Victorian times, you had that whole struggle between the Order of Miserum, the Ancient Accepted, and the Pillared Priests. And eventually they got there. We have the Prince Mate, we have all that stuff there. But I don't think it is of any great historical background. That's my personal view to it. It's all developed probably mid-18th century, early part of the 19th century, and has come forward from there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we've been discussing this issue with several lecturers, so it's always interesting to have additional
An uninformed view from Ireland. Yes, I know.
uninformed. Well, it's quite well informed, I guess. Well, anyway, just well, actually, we will be discussing Knights Templars in Scotland with Robert Cooper. We're just discussing the when and date, and actually, I will share with you the calendar with the slots, and we would love to learn more about Irish Freemasonry, its structure, its orders, and whatever can be shared with us publicly. We'll be just delighted to host and go into the details, because it's the oldest part of it.
If you find a slot, we'll certainly do the thing in Red Cross Masonry for you, which is very interesting.
Sure, okay.
Side degree in Ireland.
Sure, excellent. Okay, any more questions? We've been around more than an hour and a half, so if we still have questions, maybe off topic as well, just to ensure you have the opportunity to ask Brother Robert's opinion on something. All right, I think we're okay for now. We still have 7 viewers on YouTube, but no more questions there. I've covered all the questions and comments in the chat. So, okay, then with your permission, I will start wrapping up the lecture for tonight, or today, somewhere still morning.
Brother David?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Brother Ken McGimsky. Brother Ken McGimsky is had his hand up for a question.
Oh, okay. I just have only one screen here, so I don't see physical hands. Please, brother, just
Yeah,
unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, Ken Majimsey. It's not a question. It's just a summons for Lodge Glittering Star. I have been to a couple of their meetings in England. That's the lodge that Brother Robert
Traveling one.
was talking about.
The 29th foot, as some would say.
That's it.
You're always welcome. You're always welcome with us, Ken. You're always welcome with us.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, that was it.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing.
It's just on Glittering Star. Glittering Star are actually one of our headline lodges. They do an excellent job throughout the Midlands of England promoting Irish Freemasonry. And they are a very popular lodge in that they get quite a large number of visitors coming in, because our ritual in Ireland is, as Ken will tell you, quite different from the standard English ritual that's worked today. And that's why English brethren are so keen to come along and join with Ireland and enjoy some Irish ritual and enjoy some Irish harmony thereafter.
Indeed, Bob, indeed. Glittering Star, obviously I think we were the last lodge in the UK to have a meeting before shutdown, before lockdown came in March. Our installation went on the 14th of March. But yes, we travel all over England and Wales, educating English Masons, shall we say. Oh
yes, a very worthwhile task, David, and keep it up. They need all the help they can get.
This is true, Bob. This is true.
We got Brother Stefan raising hand. So
yeah, I just have a quick thing. I have a copy of this book, which I hope you can see. It's called the
An Emerald Light, yes.
Yeah, the Emerald Light, and it's actually about the switch or the change from from Lodge number 83 through into the Lodge of St. John's 209 in London, Ontario. And if anybody's interested in just maybe the first part of it, does talk about the Irish Regiment and the Royal Ulster Rifles. And I can certainly photocopy that for you or make a PDF or something. And then I also have a copy of the PDF of just give me 1 second here. I can't, my eyesight's really crap. Okay, well, anyway, it was the Gould book on
oh yes, on the regiments.
On the regiment, yeah.
Yes, that's so, very good, actually.
Yeah, and I have that in PDF format if somebody would like a copy of it. And what else do I have? Well, I have a couple of notes from Parkinson about the military warrants. One of the things he said was that the Grand Lodge of Ireland was the first to initiate the idea of traveling warrants. So I thought that was pretty cool. And as you said,
and the interesting thing, and I tried to get that across today, the interesting thing, in 1730, whenever they were looking at setting up the warrants, they always had two tiers. You had the stationary warrant and you had the traveling warrant. And they were the first to come up with that concept.
Yeah.
And of course, then whenever our old friend Lawrence Dermott went across and helped establish the Grand Lodge of the Ancients, he was familiar with that Irish concept and familiar with the way that the papers had been structured. So he set up the same situation as the Grand Lodge of the Ancients. The moderns at that particular time were more a gentleman's club. And they weren't really that concerned with what these working class people were doing on the Ancients. And then suddenly about 1785, 1790, they realized that there were quite a number of overseas lodges affiliated to the Grand Lodge of the Ancients, while they basically had most of their lodges in the southeast of England. And it rang alarm bells for them. And they then became much more active in bringing in military warrants and much more active in trying to promote themselves overseas. But by that stage, the damage had been done, because between Ireland, Scotland, and the Grand Lodge of the Ancients, quite a lot of Freemasonry had already seeped out of the UK and gone around the globe.
Yeah.
And they did end up in London, Ontario.
Indeed. Yeah.
Brother Stephen, if you can share that file PDF or here in public chat, or drop it with me, I could share it in the group. So if anyone wants, we'll just download it.
I'll do that. I'll send it to you, because unfortunately it's not on this particular computer.
No problem.
So
No problem. We can do that for the groups, or
okay,
even
good.
include in the email. So if anyone wants, can get acquainted with it. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
I'd like just like to say, tell Brother Robert that both me as well as Brother Abraham Mampelis, who's here, we are both members of the Irish Council of Knight Masons. So
yes. Our old friend Bernard Woods will keep you right down.
we are members of that, and
excellent. Well, interesting enough, whenever I come to do the Red Cross degrees, they are very much the precursor to the Grand Council of Knight Masons. So you'll hear some stuff of interest there, hopefully.
It's interesting, very interesting.
Oh, that's it. And of course, the Grand Council of Knight Masons would now be the quickest growing, fastest growing Masonic organization in the world. They are constituting quite a number of councils around the globe. And if Demetrius Contessa is still hiding out there somewhere, he's much more well informed on the Grand Council of Knight Masons than poor old me. So he could fill you in on where they're going and what they're doing.
I think ours is number 98.
All right. Okay. Yes. Well, you'll be aware that next year is their 100th anniversary.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
2023, Bob.
Good afternoon, Demetrius. You're well.
Good afternoon, Bob. 2023.
We keep.
Yeah.
Have to keep Bernard back a year.
Okay, then I'll let me finish the lecture part, and then we can go on chatting if I keep the room open until we need. So once again, thank you, Brother Robert, so much for your time, for your presentations, and we'll discuss later on next possible topics and topic and the date we can get more light on Irish Freemasonry. It would be great to have you with us again. So having said that, maybe you want to take floor for final remarks, any references you want to make, because we're not talking about for this group only, but the viewers and the future viewers. You may want to leave anything for them.
Well, Brian, I think we've covered quite a bit of ground in the last couple of presentations. I would congratulate you on the time capsule. It was an excellent idea. And as you know, I have bumped mine around a few of the discussion groups in Ireland, and I'm hoping to get a few more responses back. But really, I would just want to leave one thought with you, and it's a very simple thought about Freemasonry in general. And as we in Ireland would see it, Freemasonry is very much a part of society, not apart from society. And if we go forward on that basis, we'll not go far wrong. So that's my thought for tonight. Thank you all very much again.
Thank you so much. I will just remind everyone that today we had Saperiao, the number 107th. We had the honor to host Right Worshipful Brother Robert Bashford from Grand Lodge of Ireland, the Irish Freemasonry, and we discussed the topic, the story of Irish traveling military warrants. So I will use the opportunity to once again thank you so much for the excellent gifts that I received, the badge from the Lodge of Research. Thank you for that, and the 2 books that will be deposited, as I already told you, for our emerging library, not even library, but emerging one. So thank you so much for sharing and taking efforts to sending it from Ireland to Georgia. Thanks so much. And this concludes our lecture. Today is 6th of November, 2020. And Nahuamdis, that's goodbye in Georgian.
All the best.
Okay, now this part is not moderated. Anyone can leave, anyone can stay as long as we need to discuss any off-topic or even on-topic issues. We're still recording, we're still on YouTube, unless there is any request for keeping it more private, we'll keep it recorded. So this part is not moderated. Anyone just can turn on the microphone and talk.
Excuse me just one moment.
Sure, sure.
I had a quick comment that I was wondering if other people felt the same way. After hearing Robert Cooper the other day talking about how the Scottish Masons brought the mark to the fore in England, and I was thinking, I'd read somewhere that what's his name, Dermot, when he came to England, he brought the Royal Arch with him, and it was the ancients that had the Royal Arch, and the moderns did not. And when they got back together again, it was one of the insisting things from the ancients that they include the Royal Arch in the new United Grand Lodge of England. So that's how I think it all came to be. But I think that the mark was brought to England by the Scots, and the Royal Arch, because it was a separate body, was brought by the ancients. Do other people think that pretty much the same way, or
any opinions on that?
Bacterial gel, the only water softener to eliminate.
Not really, I think.
Okay.
Well, actually, English brothers. Okay, Robert is here. David is not there, so maybe they would have answered your comment.
Yeah.
There you go. David is there. Maybe David has something. If you could.
Where is he?
Repeat a bit.
Well, Robert, I was just saying that the Royal Arch was really brought to England by Dermot from Ireland, was he not? Was it
That's
not?
correct. Yes, indeed.
And as Robert Cooper said the other day, that the mark was really brought to England from Scotland.
That would be correct. Yes.
Yes, and that's people in North America don't really get that, because the mark is only it's really relegated to being the first degree that you get in the Royal Arch, and it doesn't have the same punch as it does, I suppose, elsewhere.
Well,
certainly
over in Ireland, we exactly as you've laid out there, the mark is actually the precursor to the Royal Arch degree. England and Scotland are slightly different because they operate the mark as a separate degree, whereas we still keep it as part and parcel of our Royal Arch working. And indeed, it sets the tone for the Royal Arch. It introduces the themes, it introduces the personalities, introduces the story, and then as you go through the Royal Arch, you get the rest of the story. Was it yourself? No, maybe it was Tom was talking about traveling warrants, a thing of the past. Interestingly enough, now in Ireland, traveling warrants now seem to have moved on to a certain extent. My Mother Lodge, the Irish Lodge Research number 200 has a traveling warrant. We have been in my lifetime, we have been across to the States. We have been in Blackridge in Scotland. We have been in Lodge Hope of Karachi in Scotland. We have attended meetings of Irish Constitution Lodges in Gibraltar, right round the island of Ireland, from down in Kenmare in the southwest up until Ballycastle in the northeast and all points in between. In the last 25, 30 years, we have had a number of new lodges formed, which, like ourselves, are an association of past masters, and they are known as installed master's degrees. And they tend to move about within their province. The installed masters of Antrim could meet in Ballymoney, they could meet in Ballymena, they can meet in Belfast, and they travel about within their province, but they don't generally go beyond that. And the only other one which could be considered a traveling lodge today is the infamously named Lodge 2000 Internet Lodge, which actually don't meet in the internet, they meet physically in a lodge room. But once you set that anomaly to the side, they, like ourselves, do travel about. They could be in Cork for one meeting, they could be in Belfast for another meeting, they could be in Dublin, they can be in Waterford. They do move about, but their membership is constitution-wide. They're a bit like the Lodge Research in that sense that if you're interested, you can apply from whatever part of Ireland you live in to become a member. Now, they don't really look at, we're the only research lodge that looks into Masonic research in Ireland, and the Internet Lodge tend to look more into the various aspects of the internet and how to preserve information, how to recall information and all this stuff. But there are still traveling warrants, just not in the style that they used to be in the past.
Interesting too that I think a lot of people don't realize it, but unlike many of the other constitutions, the Grand Lodge of Ireland at least used to reissue the same number to somebody else. Like if you were, yeah, you know, like the Grand Lodge of Canada won't do that.
Yes, this is part of the excitement of being a Masonic researcher in Ireland. You get the same number appearing all over the place.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, this whole process began in 1808, and it began with the best possible reasons behind it. The Grand Lodge had opened its first Masonic accommodation and school for orphan girls, and it was funded by the money got from the reissue of warrants to lodges. In the old days, we would have had a church service on the 2 St. John's Day, and you would have paraded to church. My lodge number is Myarget 280. I live about 10 miles down the road from Ballycastle Lodge 89. Ballycastle Lodge 89 in 1808 changed its warrant from Ballycastle Lodge 1008. And because they did that, they moved from the back of the church parade to the front of the church parade. And that was the incentive for lodges to change their warrant numbers. But every time they changed their warrant number, they were providing funds for the girls' school. And then eventually in 1850, the boys' school came on board and it was funded along the same sort of lines. So the reason to do it came from the best of intentions. Military lodges always tried to get a number as close to the regimental number that they could find. And from that point of view, once they got their first warrant, they then tried to move up the peg in order to a number which reflected their lodge number. And that's why they were so keen to change their lodge numbers. Civilian lodges would have looked at the lodges in their immediate surrounding area, and they would have done like Ballycastle. They would have tried to move up the order and improve their status. And the thing about it is, whenever whenever old warrants became vacant, as in the natural flow of things to do, there is a total break between that warrant and its reissue. So if that warrant did something glorious 100 years ago, and you only got it 10 years ago, it's nothing to do with you or your lodge, and you've no claim on that. And that's an interesting one which comes up from time to time with some lodges that look back in the history books, look at the work of Parkinson and look at some of his references to lodge numbers, and then they say, but that's our lodge number, we must have done that. But it's not as simple as that. It's a fascinating study, and I mean, It's kept me out of the pub for 30 years, so it's worked reasonably well. And it is an amazing, it's a window into the social circumstances that pertained in Ireland 100, 200 years ago. And it so closely follows the social structures of those days that it's fascinating.
Can I ask one question? The warrants for traveling lodges in Ireland were issued to the members of Irish Lodge or any other members, I guess, with recognized or with amity jurisdictions can also apply or applied in the past?
Each warrant on the Irish Constitution bears three names. It bears the name of the man who will become the first master, and it bears the two names of the men who will be the senior warden and junior warden. And that has pertained since 1731. Now, as time has passed, in the early days, 2 or 3 brethren came together and decided they want to have a lodge in their village or whatever, and they did that, and then they were able to bring in the local people as members. If you look at more modern days, you look, look at the 20th century. The 20th century basically was slightly different. If you wanted to form a lodge, you got together a band of people. You could have 12 members or 15 members or whatever number of members wanting to constitute a new lodge. And because they had applied as a group on the application going down to the Grand Lodge Board of General Purposes, they were founder members of that lodge, new lodge. And because they were founder members, it meant in the 20th century, they had the opportunity, if the lodge so decided, they could issue foundation jewels to all 20 members. And once your name, if you apply as a founder, I wanted to be a founder of a lodge, you're entitled to wear a foundation jewel. And certainly in the early part of it, well, it really would have been the 1890s. From the 1890s forward, this tradition of issuing foundation jewels started to come into existence. And they became a very popular way of encouraging people to support you whenever you wanted to form a new lodge, because they were entitled to get and wear their foundation jewel. Sometime again, I'll tell you all about foundation jewel, but they are an interesting aspect of Freemasonry last century and the 20th century. And they equally follow on from the other side, of course, that if your lodge has been in existence for 100 years or 150 years or 200 years, they then issue a commemorative jewel similar to the foundation jewel, which all of the current members of the lodge are entitled to wear. And that commemorates 200 years of continuous service to Grand Lodge Ireland, or 100 years, or in fact, I've seen one or two that's only 25 years, but nonetheless, it gives you an opportunity to produce a special jewel for your members. And that jewel can then be given out if you have a provincial Grand Master who comes along to your occasions, or somebody from Grand Lodge that comes along. You can give that to them as a gift. Not unlike the gift you got. I mean, that's the sort of jewel that's specific to one lodge that is given out and handed around.
Well, my question was regarding more the individuals who could apply for traveling lodge. Let's say if Rui, myself, and Stefan now decide that we will be traveling to, I don't know, for some trading reasons or business or whatever, and we want to have a traveling lodge warrant from Irish Constitution.
That would be hard to get at the moment.
Theoretically speaking,
we have a structure in place now where you would apply for a warrant, a special interest warrant, if you wanted to set up a lodge of golfers or a lodge of, well, Galen Lodge, a lodge of pharmacists, for example, in Belfast. We have those sort of special interest lodges. Now, those lodges need to be recommended. If you're setting up to hold a lodge in Belfast, you need to have 3 local Belfast lodges prepared to back your application. You also need to get your application put through the Provincial Grand Lodge of Antrim or the Provincial Grand Lodge of Down, depending which part of the city of Belfast you're in. and you need to get the backing of the Provincial Grand Lodge in wherever you're going to be based. That then all goes down to Dublin for approval, and as I say, you need to have your list of founder members and what have you there. But that is for a stationary lodge, stationary warrant. It's very, very difficult now, other than those specific examples I gave you of installed masters lodges or whatever. It's very difficult to get a traveling. Ordinary lodges do not travel. If you want to go, if I want to go from my Argot, my home lodge, and I want to hold a meeting in Ballymena, I have to apply to my Provincial Grand Lodge and get an authorization from them to move the warrant for that meeting. But that's only for that one meeting, and then I'm back to my Argot for my warrant is issued. So it's very difficult to get traveling warrants now, in the sense that the military traveling warrants are there.
So the applicants should be the members of the Grand Lodge of Ireland, or can other jurisdictional kind of members of other jurisdictions can apply? Let's say we are going to, I don't know, Afghanistan, where might not be any Grand Lodge represented, let's say Iran for that matter, and we just want to have a warrant and work under warrant. Should we be part of the Grand Lodge of Ireland to have theoretical authority to apply for this? Or can any recognized or even not recognized lodge members can apply for it? It doesn't matter how hard it is.
It would be very unlikely that the Grand Lodge would issue warrants to anyone who has not went through the Irish degree system. You would need to be first degree. You need to be a past master of Irish lodges, certainly for the proposed new master, and the other two brethren who would be the wardens would need to be master masons, but they would all need to be based on an Irish lodge. It would be very unlikely, unless you get somewhere up the tree, Grand Lodge, somebody's going to back you in the issue of a warrant. But it's the way it's set up at the moment, it does tend to be more geared towards a growth in a local area. Even if you take our warrant, Leinster and Australia or Ara and New Zealand, it's possible for three brethren from Leinster or from Ara to apply for another Irish warrant down there. Now, because of the fact that in Australia and New Zealand, there are a number of other Grand Lodges down there at the moment, it would be difficult enough to get. But having said that, if you're going somewhere where there's no warrant, that could be difficult. It could be very difficult, in fact.
Okay.
I have a question too about sort of about the same thing. Back in when Lodge number 83 came to London, Ontario, there wasn't any local lodges operating under any other system. There had been, but the one went dark because the whole reason why the regiment was there was because there had been a
border incursion, was it not, from the States?
No, it was a revolution, sort of, but they didn't call it that. A revolt, I guess, in Upper Canada and Lower Canada, actually. And the regiments were sent to London, which was a fairly large center at the time, to keep the peace, basically. And the other lodge had closed down because a large majority of its members were members of the rebellion on the wrong side. But anyway, that's the way the thing worked. But at any rate, because there was no local lodge operating, the regimental lodge was allowed to initiate and pass and raise local members. But if there had been a local lodge operating, they would not have been allowed to do that. And I just wondered if that was still the case.
Oh, that's very much still the case. You cannot, if you're a traveling warrant, and indeed Glitter and Star would know better than I would here, but if you have another Irish lodge in your vicinity, you cannot take members from the sitting local lodge to put them into a travelling lodge. That's one of our still existing laws and the laws and constitution from memory. And that hasn't changed. And the reason for that is that if there's a local lodge present, if you're taking members away and you're vanishing into the mists, you're leaving people out there who haven't a home in a local lodge and who may not actually join the local lodge. They may have seen all they want to see in the military end and they've given it up. So that's discouraged greatly. And indeed, if you can see the minute books in the Grand Lodge of Ireland, you see from time to time, you're getting complaints from various parts of the globe that a travelling military warrant has installed one or two local, or invested one or two local people, and they're kicking up to Grand Lodge about it.
Mm.
All the
Okay.
joys of administration.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, I have to run, brethren, but I'll certainly send those files off to David, and he can disseminate them as people
Sure.
would like. And Brother Bashford, perhaps we can talk somewhere along elsewhere.
Oh,
So-
I hope to have something more posted up for you later this weekend as things develop.
Okay.
Give you a bit of bedtime reading.
Okay, good. Thank you. And good
Good to
night,
see you.
brother. Good afternoon.
Good night, Stephen.
Yep.
Brother Jivad, Brother Inan, I might be traveling with my wife and my mother-in-law to Istanbul somewhere soon. So I might have a chance to say at least hi. I don't know about the regulations in Istanbul now, but for some medical treatment, we still have to visit Acıbadem. So
One of the most striking places I've ever been in my Masonic travels was in the headquarters building in Istanbul, which at one time was the old German college. That's where they used to take the ruling sons and were educated by the Germans there. But they have a most marvelous dining room up on the 7th floor overlooking the Bosphorus, which is probably one of the most striking places I've ever dined in my entire Masonic career.
Grand Lodge of, you mean the Grand Lodge of building, right?
Yep.
It's very good news. I am very happy to see you.
I hope. We're still deciding on some regulation things, and we need some decisions from Turkish side to allow us with my card to take our driving. So we'll see. I'll let you know anyway. But
Please let me know.
Yes, sure. I definitely look forward meeting you guys.
Okay, then I'm not going to send your gift. You'll take it by hand when you come here.
Well, that could be also an option.
Yes.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm waiting your news.
Yes, I will inform you in private later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, brother, do you have a set date for visiting us? I mean, coming to Istanbul?
Working on it. It doesn't depend on me. It depends on first Turkish authorities to allow us Georgians without quarantine drive through the country from Batumi to Istanbul. And the second part is Acıbadem needs to clarify and issue a letter for my mother-in-law that she's coming for treatment. She's kind of a regular kind of patient. So.
And another thing, if all these okay, I would like to know which branch of Acıbadem. There are many branches, as
Malak.
Renan knows.
The Maslak
could be.
Maslak, the European side and to the north.
To the north, yes.
Maslak, it's Maslak, yeah.
Okay, you just let us know. I'm looking forward to meeting you.
I hope we'll have chance for that. I don't know. Is it still kind of okay to meet? Are things open? I don't.
yeah, we can meet in a cafe, open air. I mean,
We'll find the way.
outdoor meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
We'll fix it. Don't worry.
Don't forget to get your masks.
No.
It's obligatory. It's, you have to wear it here.
Same here. Same here. Inside or outside, now it's obligatory everywhere.
Yes.
I'm having it with me here at the office.
If we can find something, we can go underground. Don't worry.
We'll find the way.
Anyway, do you need somebody from the hospital? Can we help?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. The doctor, which is there, already been helping her out since 2015 or 16. So she just went all this chemical therapy, everything, but she now wants to see the patient and doesn't want to continue without checking there. So she doesn't want to take responsibility for the kind of results here in Georgia. It's kind of their policy. So we have to travel physically there, take her physically to the doctor so she can decide whether she needs additional treatment or not of this chemical stuff. So sorry, brothers, for bringing up this private things, but I just said that I just thought it would be
a good opportunity, David. Well, listen, I'm going to have to jet off and leave you here. Again,
okay, sure.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you all. And as I say, I hope you found something of interest and bread in the midst of all that information. I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Definitely. Looking forward, and have a good evening and great weekend for you.
Oh, we'll do our best. We'll have a small gin somewhere. Night for now.
Enjoy it. Bye-bye, and thank you so much for your time.
Good night, brethren.
Good night. So there was one file that will be sent by Stefan, and I will share it in the group, in WhatsApp group or in Telegram group. If anyone wants to save the chat, please do so. And then I'll wrap up the meeting with your kind permission, unless we need the room open. Okay, so a few more seconds then, and then I'll close it.